The 1940s were over, and the National Football League was changing with the new decade. We had some new faces and teams in town, and the NFL was going to get that much more interesting as we enter into the 1950 season with George Bozeka, the president of the Professional Football Research Association, joins us to tell us about the season. And it's all coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Hello, my football friends. This is the Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And welcome to another edition of our NFL Championships before the Super Bowl, as we invite guests on from the city that won the championship, experts, historians, authors, and more, really giving us a great glimpse of the season and these teams and players that won NFL championships back in yesteryear. Today is no exception. We have the PFRA president and author and historian, George Bozeka, with us today. George, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Thanks, Darren. Looking forward to it.
Hey, George, I know you have been very active in the PFRA. There's a lot of things going on. Is there anything you can share with us to look forward to?
Yeah, we have our convention this year. We have our national conventions every other year, and this is a convention year for us. So from July 10th through the 13th, we'll be in Minneapolis, St. Paul this year. And as usual, we have 2 days of speakers, Friday and Saturday, starting Friday evening. And then we have add-on activities the other days. Some of the things that we've already scheduled for the weekend is a tour of the Minnesota Vikings Museum, a tour of the University of Minnesota Stadium where the Vikings actually played at one time. And we're hoping to line up also a tour of the Vikings Stadium. They don't book things until like about 2 months in advance. So we're hoping to book that in May. We've already been in touch with them and explained what we like to do. And, we have our usual speakers program on Friday evening. We have our meet and greet, and then our usual speakers program, and then all day Saturday also. And if anybody's interested in registering, it's $75 for PFRA members, $100 for non-members, a little additional cost for the add-on activities. And also we have a special rate at the hotel. We're having it at the Drury in St. Paul. We were at the Drury in Pittsburgh for our last convention, and we liked the amenities, and they were just great hosts. And when we found out that there was a Drury also in that same area, we jumped on that because they just did a fine job hosting us, and we're looking forward to being at the Drury again. But we have a special rate there, and you can find everything on our website, profootballresearchers.com. And then if you go to the homepage, look for the link to the 2025 convention, and all the information is there about how to register and just a complete breakdown of all of our speakers. We have a number of authors, newspaper reporter from the Minneapolis area who's also a Hall of Fame selector, Mark Craig. And we also have some former players coming in. So it's going to be a great weekend. Always hear, nothing but, great things from people that attend. They always have a great time, and just, great weekend of pro football history.
Yeah, absolutely. The ones that I've attended have been excellent, and you always run a great ship, you and the guys that are doing that. And like you said, the amenities are really great at the hotels or the places that we stay at, where we have the meetings at. So that's always a good time. So, and you get to, rub shoulders with some NFL players and some great historians and talk football all weekend. It could be better than that, right?
Yeah. And the other big thing this year is the fourth book in our great team series will be coming out on the 1964 Bills, and we're hoping that that'll be out just in time for the convention. But that's the other exciting thing that's happening for us this year, is the release of our fourth book in the series.
Wow, that is definitely exciting too. So let me know when that comes out, and when you have some time, we'll have you come on and talk about that too when it's out and where people can get that.
Love to do that.
Yeah, definitely. But tonight we've got you on an assignment. One of your passionate seasons, one of the teams that you grew up watching, the Cleveland Browns in the 1950 season. And What can you tell us about the National Football League and the Cleveland Browns in 1950?
This was sort of a seminal year for the NFL because of course, for the 4 years prior to that, the NFL had a competitor in the All-America Football Conference, of which the Browns were a member, and actually they were the dominant member of that league. Oddly enough, there's just some really interesting ironies and ties that occur in the 1950 season. The Cleveland Rams had been a team in Cleveland in the NFL up through the 1945 season. And in fact, in 1945, they won the NFL championship with Bob Waterfield as their quarterback. They won 15-14 over the Redskins, the then Redskins. Obviously not no longer, but at that time, the Washington Redskins. Daniel Reeves was the Rams owner. And it had always been a dream of his to take a team out to the West Coast. So within weeks after winning the NFL championship, he moved the team to Los Angeles. They were the first major sports franchise to be on the West Coast. There had been some traveling teams that with the name Los Angeles, the Wildcats and the Buccaneers, that had played in the NFL, but they were the first major sports franchise on the West Coast. So he was a pioneer in that regard, because probably without that move, who knows? The Dodgers then moved from Brooklyn, the Giants moved from New York, and we know the history. The Lakers, moved from Minneapolis. So, it opened up, basically the western half of the country and the West Coast. So, oddly enough, as the Rams were leaving, the Browns were starting. The Browns of the AAFC. They were the owner was Mickey McBride, a local taxi cab magnate who also had ties to gambling and some other things. He was I would just say that Mickey McBride was a colorful character, and the real architect of the team, of course, though, was Paul Brown. Paul Brown obviously started. Or at least made a name for himself at Massillon High School in the 30s when he had a dominant, high school team that won 6 state championships, and then moved on to Ohio State, won a national championship at Ohio State in 1942. During the war, he was at Great Lakes, and then in 1946 he becomes the coach of the Cleveland Browns. And the Browns just took off. In the 4 years that they were in the AAFC, they dominated the league. They won all 4 league championships in those 4 years. This 48 team was undefeated, and they just dominated. The league, though, basically disbanded, and 3 teams were then absorbed into the NFL in 1950. The Browns, the 49ers, who had also been a successful franchise, and the Baltimore Colts. Colts hadn't been as successful, but those are the 3 teams that were absorbed into the NFL. So this was a big year for the Browns, because a lot of people in the NFL didn't really respect the AAFC. They sort of looked at it as a minor league. They looked down on it. Even though the Browns had dominated, they didn't think much of the Browns. The team that was actually the dominant team in the NFL at that time was the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles had appeared in the NFL championship game in 47, 48, and 49. They lost in 47 to the Cardinals, but then in 48 and 49, they won, beating the Cardinals and then beating the Los Angeles Rams, who obviously were then in Los Angeles. It was the second championship game for the Rams in that time frame. So given this history and the fact that the Browns were now going to be in the NFL and had dominated this other league, Bert Bell, who was the commissioner at the time, who was also responsible for scheduling, it was really interesting to me that Bert Bell, didn't use computers to schedule them. Bert Bell actually did the scheduling basically, by laying a bunch of stuff out and using basically everything was by hand, and that's amazing to me. But he scheduled the Browns and the Eagles to play on the opening weekend of the NFL season in 1950. And this was much ballyhooed, as you can imagine. It was going to be played at Shibe Park in Philadelphia. And many at the time referred to it as the World Series of professional football. And the two teams met. Everybody expected the Eagles to win handily, but the Browns dominated. They beat the Eagles 35-10, and they were off and running and finally got respect as a result of that game. Although there's a little side story which I'll get into, but that's sort of the introduction to the world of the NFL in 1950 and why it was a seminal year.
Yeah, that's definitely an important year. And it's, we might add that it's just recently, 75 years later, that the National Football League has absorbed and counting the records of the
Yes,
AAFC.
yes,
So it's
yes,
allowing a guy like Otto Graham to have as many championships as Tom Brady now. So
yes,
that's
exactly.
well deserved, and glad that
Yes.
they finally did that.
Yeah, exactly. And it was, it was just a fantastic team that Paul Brown, had put together. I think through his years in, college football and then during the war, he was keeping, I believe, a mental notebook of players. And then those from that pool of players, he just put together an outstanding, team in the Browns. And you mentioned Otto Graham, obviously, probably his linchpin as his quarterback. And Otto Graham, as you said, won 3 NFL championships, but also now is going to be getting credit for the 4 championships that he won in the AAFC. And as you said, tying Tom Brady with 7, championships. And Otto was just a great, not only football player, he was a great all-around athlete. He also played professional basketball for a season, which is really amazing. But he was just a great all-around athlete.
Yeah, that's definitely a testament to Paul Brown. Is definitely one of those guys that if you were going to put coaches' faces up on a Mount Rushmore, Paul Brown in history football of all levels of football
Yeah,
is definitely one that should be in there for being the mastermind of these Browns teams
yeah.
and some of the innovations he did.
Yeah, yeah, we were talking before the podcast that I had the opportunity the other day. It's going to be released soon. Doing an interview on my own podcast with Upton Bell, and Upton Bell referred to Paul Brown in his book. Upton Bell is Burt Bell's son, the commissioner at that time, and he referred to Paul Brown as football's Moses. And
Good
felt that
analogy.
felt that he was the at the top of his 10 best coaches of all time because of the many innovations that he did and just what he brought to the game.
Yeah, cannot disagree with that a bit. That's a great analogy by Upton on that.
Yeah,
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 most definitely. So who was the competition? So the Browns come in, they shellac the defending champions
yeah,
of the National Football League. Is there anybody that's standing up against the Browns during the season?
yeah. Actually, there were 2 conferences in 50, the American Conference, of which the Browns were members, and the National Conference. The Browns' big rival in the American Conference were the New York Giants. Actually, the Giants beat them twice during the regular season, and
Hmm.
those were the only 2 losses that the Browns had that year. The Browns finished 10-2. The Giants finished 10-2.
Hmm.
So they met in basically a tiebreaker playoff game to decide who would go to the NFL championship game. The Browns won 8-3. No touchdowns were scored in the game. Two, three field goals and a safety, 8-3.
Sounds more
So
like a baseball score,
yeah,
huh?
yeah. And then on the other side in the National Conference, the teams that were making noise were the aforementioned Rams and the Chicago Bears, and they both finished 9-3 that year. So in another irony, they met also in a tiebreaker playoff game, which the Rams won 24-14. As it turned out, the Rams ended up being their championship opponent, and the Rams were, the team that was their biggest rival at the time. The Rams were just another amazing collection of players then, in that they were coached by Joe Stidehar. The year before, when they made it to the NFL championship game and lost to the Eagles, they were coached by Clark Shaughnessy, who I'm sure is familiar to a lot of football fans as one of the great, minds in football history with the T formation and his years with the Bears, and just a great football mind. And Steinhardt, though, took over in 1950, a little bit more of a player's coach. And he took over in 1950. And the thing that made the Rams unique is that they not only had one Hall of Fame quarterback like the Browns and Otto Graham, they had two Hall of Fame quarterbacks, and it worked. They had Bob Waterfield, who had led them to the championship in 1945, and they also had Norm Van Brocklin. And the two of them split duties, and as I said, it somehow worked. They were a successful team with two Hall of Fame quarterbacks. We did a PFRA book, as I mentioned, we're having the Buffalo Bills book. Our last book in the series was the 51 Rams. And as I told a reporter from Los Angeles when the book came out, Los Angeles area, Orange County, I said it would be like having Brady and Peyton Manning on the same team, and that they happily coexisted, and basically one played 2 quarters a game and the other one played the other 2 quarters. That would just be absolutely unheard of today. But this is something that was really unique about the Rams, and not only was it unique, they had one of the most prolific offenses in the history of the league. They scored 466 points that year in 12 games, which was a 38.8 point average. They scored 45 points twice, 51 points once, 65 points once, and 70 points once. So they were putting, pinball numbers, up with their offense. And they had 2 great receivers that also matched the Browns. They had Crazy Legs Hirsch and Tom Fears. So the Rams were, in addition to the Giants, the Rams were the big rival.
Yeah, we speaking of that point total, back a few weeks ago, we posted on the front page of Pigskin Dispatch infographic on the highest scoring teams per game in the history of professional football, and we included all of the AFLs, the AAFC, and the NFL, and the 1950 Rams with that 38.83 are number 1 points per game in points per game. The next closest is Peyton Manning's 2013 Broncos at 37.7. So almost a point less per game with a modern offense. And this is back in the day where passing was sort of the afterthought. You passed when you got in trouble most of the time. You ran the ball in most of the NFL.
Well, 2 things about that. They outscored the next team in the league point-wise by 100 points. Because the next team was the New York Yanks, not the Yankees, but the New York Yanks. There was a franchise called the New York Yanks, and they were a pretty good team that year. I think they finished 7-5. They were a good team, but they scored 366 points, so 100 less than the Rams, and they were the next closest to the Rams in points. The Rams had what I'll call a solid defense, but the Browns actually had a really strong defense. They only gave up, I believe, it was like it was in the 140s. They gave up 100 and let's see, if I give you the right number, they gave up 144 points that year.
Wow.
So the Browns had, and that wasn't the lowest amount. Actually, the lowest amount was the Eagles. The Eagles only gave up 141. Remember, that was a 12-game season back then. But the New York Yanks scored 366 points, which was 100 less than the Rams. But oddly enough, the Yanks finished 7-5. I was right. They gave up 367 points. So they scored 366, but they gave up 367, which is why they ended up with about, just a little above a 500 record. So, but you were talking about passing. That's one thing that was unique about both these teams was that they both had great passing attacks, which, as you said, was unusual back then. Actually, Greasy Neal, the coach of the Eagles, after his Eagles lost to the Browns in that opening game that year, he sort of made a crack that the Browns should be playing basketball because they put the ball in the air so much. So when the Browns met the Eagles again in their second game of the year, Paul Brown famously didn't pass the ball once and beat them 13-7. Yeah, he wanted to show that he could beat him without passing the ball after Greasy Neal said that. So it was sort of like a, touche.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about the quarterback,
Yes.
Otto Graham. Who were the running backs that had this great running game for the Browns?
their big back then was Marion Motley, who famously Paul Zimmerman in his book The Thinking Man's Guide to Pro Football called Marion Motley, he thought the greatest pro football player of all time. And Marion Motley led the league that year in rushing with 810 yards rushing in 12-game season. But Marion Motley was a load. And that's the other unique thing about, the 50 Browns and then also the 50 Rams and why they were where they were, is that these were the two teams in 1946 that reintegrated pro football. The Rams did it when they moved to Los Angeles. They wanted to play their games in the Coliseum. And because the Coliseum involved public money and everything, the black press in Los Angeles basically felt that, if they were going to do that, that they had to integrate. So they, the two players that they took on were Woody Strode and Kenny Washington, both great, black football players at the time. Woody Strode actually went on to have a really successful acting career. He actually was famously fought Kirk Douglas in the movie Spartacus at the very beginning when they showed the gladiators and when they were training them as gladiators, and they fought to the death in that. And then he was also sort of John Wayne's right-hand man in John Ford's Western, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, which was with John Wayne, Lee Marvin, Jimmy Stewart, and Woody Strode played in that. And he also made some other movies for John Ford too. So he had a fairly successful acting career, which is not unusual. A lot of times that Rams team was called the Hollywood Rams because, Bob Waterfield, their quarterback, was married to Jane Russell, who was a sex symbol at the time. Glenn Davis, who was their running back, and who actually played famously at Army in the 40s, those great Army teams in the 40s. He was Mr. Outside with Doc Blanchard, who was Mr. Inside. He at one time dated Elizabeth Taylor. And it was not uncommon if you go down the roster. Guy Crazy Legs Hurst made movies. He was in a movie called 0 Hour that was the movie that Airplane, the comedy movie, was based on. It wasn't a comedy that Elroy Crazy Legs Hurst was in, but it was based on the storyline. So that wasn't uncommon. That was the thing about that team. The Browns, though, just to give you who their offensive weapons were, Marion Motley. And then they had two Hall of Fame receivers in Dante Lavelli, Glue Fingers, and Max Speedy. So those were their key offensive weapons. And Motley, as I said, I was starting to get into it. Motley is actually from my hometown, Canton, Ohio. Motley started his career in Canton at Canton McKinley High School. Who famously, their biggest rival was Paul Brown's Massillon team. Just to give you another tie-in with some of these guys. But yeah, those were the key, offensive weapons on that 50 Browns team. They also had a great place kicker in Lou Groza, who is going to factor importantly in the championship game that year. And also a great punter in Horace Gillum, who also played for Paul Brown at Massillon. They also had Tommy James, who played for Paul Brown in Massillon. That was one of their great defensive backs, and also Lou Groza's holder. So they just had, between the two teams, 12 players went on to be Hall of Famers, plus Paul Brown. So, you had a large collection of Hall of Famers on those teams. That eventually played in the championship game. Not to get away from the Browns, but just to show you, the excellence. And they were also the most integrated teams in the league at that time. The two of them were the most integrated teams in the league at that time, which I believe is an important factor in their success.
Yeah,
the two players, obviously, that the Browns brought on, just so I don't miss that, was Marion Motley and Bill Willis. Their great defensive player who had played at Ohio State. And Bill Willis and Marion Motley were the two players that reintegrated Cleveland. So these are two teams that were actively involved in that. I think that's important to the story of the 50 Browns and why they had the success they did, I think, in the AAFC and then moving on into the to the NFL. Plus, with Paul Brown being ahead of his time in terms of some of his innovations, I think that too was a key. You had the rivals. It's not surprising because they were two innovative teams in the way they, did things.
Yeah, this is like a matchup made in heaven.
Yeah,
If you just
yeah.
lay it out, I mean, you talk about the receivers for the Browns, with Levante and or yeah,
Lavelli.
yeah, Lavelli
Yeah,
and the other end you got Fears and Crazy Legs on the other side. You
yep,
got great quarterbacking on both sides. You got great
yeah,
backs on both sides. You
yeah,
got
yeah,
the elephant backfield and the pony
yeah,
backfield of the Rams against
yeah,
Motley
yeah,
with the Browns and coaches that have been in championship. Paul Brown with those
yeah,
AAFC championships
yeah.
and everything. And Stidahar, we've talked to him about him a lot as a
Right.
player. He
There.
he
Yeah,
studied
yeah,
under Hallis,
yeah, yeah,
one of the
yeah,
great and
yeah.
was in the championships quite a bit in the
Well,
40s. So.
and he's also I believe he's a Hall of Famer as a player. I believe.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah,
I
this
didn't
is
even include him on the list. So yeah, yeah, because he's in as a player, I believe.
yeah he is, and so this is like a great matchup. So tell us a little bit about the game. How does the game play out?
As I said, both teams had the tiebreaker games. So they played on Christmas Eve, 1950 at Cleveland Municipal Stadium. It was a cold day. It was temperature was in the high 20s, around 27. I saw one account that said 27, one that said like around 29. It was definitely a cold day. The ground was icy. It was also a windy day. So the conditions were not great. Most of the Browns players, if not all of them, actually wore sneakers. Uh, the Rams were hoping to be able to get away playing with spikes, and they actually had somebody file down the spikes so they were sharper, but they weren't allowed to wear those, so they had to wear a conventional spike. Although a handful of their players did also wear sneakers. So I remember seeing a famous picture of Otto Graham in a pair of Converse All Stars with his football uniform, which again, not something you would normally see in today's game with the footwear that they have today. But yeah, so those are the conditions, and obviously the Browns knew that they were going to have to deal with this great offensive attack that the Rams had, and the Rams drew first blood on the very first play of the game. They basically set up a play that basically sort of used Tom Fears, who had caught 84 balls that year, which was at the time a record. That was a record at the time. And when you think about it, in 1950, to catch 84 balls, it's a lot of receptions. So they sort of used him as a decoy, and they held Glenn Davis back a little bit. And then Glenn Davis broke. Waterfield hit him with the pass, and Glenn Davis went 82 yards for a touchdown on the Rams' very first play of the game. So they were up 7-0 before the Browns even knew what hit them. Uh, After that, it was really sort of a back and forth game. The Rams had the lead at halftime, 14-13. And then in the second half, it continued to be sort of a back and forth game. One of the key plays in the second half was the Rams were down 20 to, I want to make sure I say this right. They were down 21-14, and they scored a touchdown to make it 21-20. Or yes, it was then they were down 20 to
They're done.
14.
They're done
Went ahead,
24-20. Yeah.
went ahead 21-20. And on the next series, Otto Graham fumbled the ball. Or I should say, Mary and Molly fumbled the ball. They went in and scored, and it was all of a sudden 28-20, like within a matter of like 20 to 30 seconds.
Hmm.
And at that point, in that point of the game, things didn't look good for the Browns. And then in the fourth quarter, Otto Graham fumbled the ball. And at that point, they had already come back and scored a touchdown. It was 28-27. And I saw a video where Otto Graham was on a TV show that used to be on a couple of years ago called The Way It Was, and it was an anthology series about great moments in pro football history. Kurt Gowdy, I don't know if you remember the name, Kurt Gowdy, the great broadcaster, he hosted it, and they did a show about the 50 championship game. And Otto Graham said at the time, he said if he could have dug a hole in Cleveland Municipal Stadium on the field, he would have jumped in the hole and hid, because he felt that with that fumble, after they had come back to make it, 28-27 down by a point with still time left, he felt that he had lost the game for them. And he came off the field, and Paul Brown actually went up to him, put his hand on his shoulder and said, "Don't worry, we're going to get it back. We'll be, in so many words, it will be fine." And sure enough, the Browns did get the ball. They moved the ball down the field, got into field goal range, and with 28 seconds left, Lou Groza, Lou the Toe, kicked a 16-yard field goal to give them the 30-28 victory over the Rams, in a game that Paul Brown later said was the greatest game he was ever associated with. Bert Bell, the commissioner, sort of mimicked that, and also said the same thing, and said that he felt the Browns were the greatest team that he had ever seen, that 1950 Browns team. So those are just some accolades from their coach, and then also from the commissioner. So I hope I didn't confuse people with the scoring sequence there, but it was 14-13. Then the Browns went up. It was at one point it was 21-20, then 28-20. The Browns were down, and then but it did go back and forth. It was 14-13 Rams. Then it was 20-14 Cleveland. Then the Rams scored 2 touchdowns to make it 28-20. Then the Browns scored to make it 28-27 Rams, and then they finally kicked a field goal to win 30-28. So
yeah, wow,
I didn't want to confuse everybody, but it was sort of a back and forth game. So that's how the scoring sequence went.
Yeah, when it all comes down to it, I mean, you have 2 great teams, and they live up to the expectations and put on probably the definitely the best game of that season, maybe one of the greatest championships in history, including all of our Super Bowls that we've had. So this is, you can't ask for anything else when you have a last second field goals kick to win the game. That's awesome. Especially back then, with field goal kicking was a little bit less accurate than it is today.
People forget Lou Groza was a straight on kicker, the old straight on kicker. He had the football shoe with the square toe at the top. He was a conventional straight on kicker, but he was probably the best kicker of his time. And oddly enough, Bob Waterfield, who was a quarterback for the Rams, also did their place kicking and also did their punting. And actually, in the documentary that I saw, Otto Graham said that he felt that Bob Waterfield was the best all-around quarterback he said that he'd ever seen. He paid that and I mean, obviously, Otto Graham was a fantastic quarterback. A lot of people, as you said, put him on the Mount Rushmore of quarterback. But to say that about Waterfield. And here's a couple other interesting asides to that game. I mentioned that the Rams had 2 quarterbacks that whole year that split duties in Van Brocklin and Waterfield. Van Brocklin only got into one play at the very end of the game, because they had pretty much did a really good job of keeping it a secret that he had broken a rib in the playoff game with the Bears. So because of that, he didn't play in the championship game. It was all Waterfield in the championship game. Whereas, all season they had split the duties. He was the quarterback in the championship game. So, both him and Otto Graham had really, great games. Otto Graham threw for 4 touchdowns. Dante Lavelli caught 11 passes and had 2 touchdown passes caught, 2 touchdown receptions. And those 11 catches, that was another record that was set in the game at that time. That was the most catches by a receiver at that time in a championship game. So these were 2 really, prolific offenses. And, one of the things that really interested me is, we talk about, big money in today's game. The winning share for the Browns was $1,113.16. And the losing share for the players on the Rams was $686.42.
You
In the
can't even
doc,
buy a seat at the championship game of the NFL for that money right now.
no, yeah. In the documentary I saw, Crazy Legs Hirsch was on it as one of the Rams players. He said under his breath, slave wages. So yeah, so uh, they weren't playing for a ton of money, and actually Bob Waterfield threw for a number of interceptions in the game and missed a field goal, and he felt that he had cost his team, money because of the fact that they lost. He sort of when he got back to Los Angeles, he sort of felt that he took some blame for that, but but this was just as I said, this was a great Browns team. We mentioned some of the Hall of Famers. Some of the other Hall of Famers on the team were Frank Gatsky, Len Ford, and we mentioned the others, and Paul Brown, and Lavelli, Groza, Motley, Graham, Willis, and Speedy. So they just had a number of Hall of Famers. So it was really just a great Browns team, and I think that was why Paul Brown had so much confidence in them, even after Graham fumbled late in the game. That he had a lot of confidence in this team and their ability to rise to the occasion. And I think they were just very well prepared by their coach. He and I think it was a great season for the Browns because as he said, they had been sort of looked down on for winning all the games that they did in the AAFC and winning the championships, and to finally go out and prove themselves first against the Eagles, the defending two-time champion, and then to continue on and win the NFC or the NFL championship in their first year in the NFL. It was very satisfying for Paul Brown and for all the players. I saw one mention that they were like a bunch of high school kids, and if you see pictures afterwards, the youthful faces of them, you sort of get that feeling of that camaraderie that you sometimes have at that level. But pro football was just a different game in the 50s. It really was. It was just a different game. Most of these guys had jobs in the off season. They weren't making the kind of money that they do today. So I think, it was really special. I know myself personally, my dad worked for Diebold's safe company in Canton, and Lou Groza, he was like a spokesperson for them in the off season. And he would come around and sometimes come around to the plants and, just be sort of a goodwill ambassador for him. And I still, to this day, have an autographed Lou Groza picture that he would sign, and my dad brought it home to me. So, it was just a different time back then, really a different time.
Yeah, it's really an amazing time. And this fact, I think, gets really overlooked. But the city of Cleveland, their professional football team is involved in a championship, either winning it or playing in a championship from 1945 with the Cleveland Rams, as we talked about earlier. Then you count the AAFC seasons of the Browns, and they go all the way to 1956 before there's not a team from Cleveland
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
championship. That's
yeah,
amazing. A
yeah, yeah.
10-year or 11-year run
Right.
of
Yeah, yeah.
championships for one city.
Right, because in 51 they had the rematch with the Rams, and the Rams won that time, 24-17, on a long touchdown pass from Van Brocklin to Fears. Then the next 2 years in 52 and 53, they lost to the Lions and Bobby Lane and Coach Buddy Parker, and they lost back to back to the Lions. Then in 54, they won the championship. And then in 55, they won it again in another rematch with the Rams. They won 38-14. Sid Gilman was then the coach of the Rams. One of the things about Daniel Reeves was he went through coaches. I mean, he seemed like he hired another coach every so many years. He had a real sort of turnstile amongst his head coaches. And Sid Gilman was the head coach then, and the Browns actually dominated them in that game, 38-14. But you're right, yeah, they played in championship games in all those years. At least a team, from Cleveland. Actually, in 1948, the Browns won AAFC championship, then Indians, now Guardians, won the World Series, and the Cleveland Barons won the American Hockey League. They were referred to as the City of Champions then because of having the 3 championship teams in 48. So there was some real success for the Browns in the late 40s. That great Cleveland 48 team that beat the Braves in the World Series. It was a great team led by Lou Boudreau, their infielder.
Yeah, that's just amazing though that people can say all they want about the droughts and or the Kansas Cities and the New Englands, in
Yeah,
recent times but 10 years in a row of
yeah,
having a team in a championship for professional football, that's amazing. And
yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, in the modern time since the Super Bowl, we've yet to have a team in the Super Bowl, which is, that's the big, Cleveland drought, and we haven't won a World Series since 48, even though, we made it to the World Series in 54, we made it in 93 and 95, and then we made it again in the I believe it was 2016, lost to the Cubs in 7 games. So we've had some heartbreak in baseball, and we've also had some heartbreak with the drive and the fumble and red right 88, and just a variety of things that at times Cleveland fans feel like they've been jinxed. But we had great success in the 40s and the 50s, I gotta say. And then the 64 championship that was after our Modell took over, fired Paul Brown, and then Blanton Collier came in and won that championship in 64 over the Don Shula, Johnny Unitas led Colts 27-0. That was the last Browns NFL championship. So yeah, it's been a bit of a drought for the Browns in both football and in baseball, though. But we still have the LeBron led NBA championship over the Warriors, so we still have that most recently. So that's why that championship over the Warriors meant so much to the Cleveland community.
yeah, yeah. That's definitely great. Now, you alluded to it earlier that you have the podcast that you and your son John run. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that and where people can find it.
Yeah, we're part of the Sports History Network. It's the official PFRA podcast, and actually we have 2 podcasts we just recently taped. One was with Leroy Horde, who played for the Browns, running back with the Browns, and also the Vikings, and that'll be released here in the next few days. And then also the one that we did, we taped on Tuesday night with Upton Bell, which will be released also right after the Horde. And we're hoping our next podcast, we've already spoken to him, is going to be with Jay Brophy, who actually grew up in the Akron area, and he played for the Miami Dolphins under Shula, and so he'll be our next one after that. But we've been doing a podcast for a couple of years now, mostly interview former players, coaches. We interviewed Wayne Fonts, who was a Lions coach for a while, because he's from the Canton area. He's a Canton McKinley product, and we've also interviewed authors, former players, and yeah, we've really enjoyed doing a podcast. And my son's my co-host. John's a sports broadcaster in Northeast Ohio, and covers everything from high school to the Browns. So yeah, we've been doing the podcast for a couple of years now. We really enjoy it.
Well, George, we really appreciate you coming on here. I don't know where you get the time to do the podcast, captain the PFRA through the conventions and everything else, the books, the writing. You're doing the editing on these books and organizational things, and just preserving the football history. And we really thank you for taking the time to tell us about this great 1950 season and these Browns and Rams teams of that era. So we appreciate you.
Well, thanks. It comes easy when you have a passion for it, and I know you have a passion for this kind of stuff too, with your great podcast too, Pigskin Dispatch, and I think it's just a matter of having a passion for it, and I always enjoy talking football history, and I always enjoy talking about the old Browns teams and Paul Brown. I hope I didn't confuse your listeners with my play-by-play
No, no.
of the game. I guess I needed my son John here to actually do the play-by-play of the game. But
No, you said it fine. We
but
got where you're coming from.
it was a wild game, and I think, just to finish up, I think the ultimate irony here, that you had the team that was in Cleveland that went out to Los Angeles, and then the team that replaced them in Cleveland. And they were the teams that met in this, seminal championship game. That was one of the great championship games and great, NFL seasons of all time because of that.
Yeah, that's great point. And
Yeah.
excellent point on that. So, George, we really thank you for joining us, and make sure everybody catch the official PFRA podcast here
Yep.
on your Sports History Network stations, and check it out on sportshistorynetwork.com or your favorite podcast provider to find George and John on their great show. George, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Darren.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.